We have unlocked all of Southpaw Deep Space 9 Season 5. Season 6 will be available exclusively on Patreon or Substack. This is Southpaw Deep Space 9 Season 5. We are your hosts, Scott and Sam. On this stardate, June 1st, 2025, we are discussing business as usual. Scott, can you tell us about this episode?
There's nothing I'd rather do than talk about the show with you. So Jadzia and Quark are playing Tongo, but Quark is quite distracted. Tongo is a popular Ferengi game. It's like got some poker vibes, some roulette vibes, Monopoly vibes, Pachinko vibes. It looks kind of fun, to be honest. Quark, if we remember from Body Parts in Season 4, is banned from working with Ferengis and owes an exorbitant amount of debt because every once in a while Quark has a bit of a conscience and does something that is not good for him. So, but because of Quark just dealing with non-Ferengi people and just not doing great in business, he's about to be broke, and that could be having to use the bar as collateral. And then all of a sudden, his cousin, Gyla, who did him dirty, shows up and wants him to do public relations because he has a scheme that he's been working, basically gun running operation under the nose of the Ferengi. That like, this is the way. If this gray dealing of arms, because remember, we are in a war, will eventually get Quark back in good graces. Elsewhere, Miles is having trouble with his newborn son, Kiriyoshi, who hasn't been sleeping and has been crying as Keiko is working on Bajor doing cool plant stuff. Jake comes to say hi, offers to babysit because he's babysat a lot of people on the station, but it is not working, so it's going to be a bring your kid to work day. At Quark's, Gyla waits for his associates, Haggith, who's clearly a little bit of a war broker. They go to see the wares, so they're going to use this hollow suite hologram showing what the guns can do, but it's not, they don't have the actual guns. They're like, but with the technology that we have now, it's an exact replication of what these guns can do. This is the loophole where this is semi-legal. They agree on the deals. They send the weapons on the way, but it's outside of the ship. It's not happening on Deep Space Nine, so it's technically not a Deep Space Nine crime. It doesn't follow, the public school rules, where in the public schools I grew up with, if you started arguing with someone in the school and you went outside and you had a fight, that was considered a school fight. But this does not seem to be the issue. Quark is, though, you can see he's uncomfortable. Maybe he's realizing that the arms dealers might be selling to all sides. And again, we're seeing Quark grow a little bit. Gyla tells Haggith that it's all Quark's idea, and Haggith promises if he crosses him, bad things will happen. But Quark, being a great businessman with questionable ethics, does a very good job. He's the best at this. Quark goes to get his money from Haggith, who explains that he's been paying the cash or the latinum to his debt to Quark's debtors. He doesn't like working with people in debt, as that becomes a liability. Just how before this government in America, they would try not to hire people with gambling debts or anything like that, because that could make someone bribable and make someone, you know what I mean. Haggith warns it will be a while before the debts are paid, but when it is, it'll be all gravy. And pointing out they're all like family, and he gives him an Ondarian glass bead necklace, which is worth a lot of scratch. At Quark's, Miles is playing darts, holding his baby with Bashir, even though we learned that Bashir is a genetic enhanced dude and could win at darts all the time, but he's being a good sport. And it's right now the only way to make baby K sleep is to hold him. Quark, we get to Quark. He's getting a little massage, and Odo comes to get him because he's saying, "You're selling guns," which is super illegal on Deep Space Nine. But ever the smug fella, Quark points out there's no proof because he's just showing off holograms. It's just video games. And Odo tries to pull him on a technicality because he's, got that jurisprudence thing going for him. But then Ben and Kira show up. They reluctantly intervene. And basically, the Bajoran government doesn't want anything to do with it because they were given guns during the occupation of Bajor by them. Odo is big mad. But Ben and Kira are big man too. They say they can't do much about it, and says that there will be no favors, and you better be careful because we're not really happy with this. Back in Haggett's quarters, he and Guyla joke about how they were made fun of for selling Bajor weapons during the Resistance. That why would you sell weapons to the losing side? And Haggett said he bet on Bajor, and he knew that the Federation and the relationships with that equals money. Because in war there is money, and in peace there is money. And then one of the associates, Farrick, shows up complaining and is fired from their job. At Quark's, he notices that no one from Starfleet's there. Maybe they're just not happy with what's going on. Guyla shows up and says the Regent of Palomar is coming. Big deals. This is going to be Guyla's last job, the big hit. He's going to retire and give Quark his spot if he wants. And Quark does want a piece because, again, he is a capitalist, and he is into money, and he is into power, and he wants back into the game. But he's still getting uncomfortable because he finds out that Farrick was permanently fired, as they're saying. Their spaceship suspiciously went boom, like in Casino, just like when the mobsters used to, rig people's cars. Quark tries to talk to Jadzia about it to place in Tongo, and she is not happy. She's like, you're a POS. Why are you helping this sort of thing? This is whack. And asks that he feels guilt. And Quark says no, but Jadzia says, you wouldn't have been here if you weren't looking for forgiveness. Elsewhere, Bashir tests Kiriyoshi, finds he's okay, but maybe just sad. And Miles' arm is starting to hurt because holding babies for a very long time in your arm takes its toll on a forearm. But Quark puts together a meal for the region of Palomar, and their former ally, General Nasik, has rebelled against him, and the regent needs an appropriate weapon to make an example of her and her followers. There's going to be a little war. And then they start having this conversation about how many deaths are going to happen with the exchange of these weapons. Maybe 8 million, maybe more. Stagger the deaths, 20 million, maybe more. And the way the way this conversation is done is banal. It is casual. It is like talking about, how many oranges you want to buy at the store, casually debating which weapon can do the most harm. And they settle that maybe they can get 28 million people to die. Quark, who's been happily handling drinks and logistics, is like, can you just shoot him in the leg? Sort of like, you know what I mean? And the Regent panics, but Hagath laughs it off as, classic Ferengi joke. Later, Quark is on the promenade, and Gyla sees that Quark's nagging conscience is becoming a liability. And again, Quark was fine selling drinks to murderers and bad people and arranging guns and drugs and whatever for bad people, but being complicit in what sounds like a genocide is not really good for him. He, mass murder is where he draws the line. And Gyla says, look at the stars, look at all the worlds at war. What's one dead planet? Would Quark walk away from 10 million bars of platinum over one quiet genocide? And Quark isn't heroic. His morality is almost inconvenient and only shows up when the stakes are way too high. Again, he's fine skimming from the suffering, but he doesn't want to see the bodies. He doesn't want to pull the trigger. He doesn't want to be involved in this. And Quark has a vision where the whole squad blame him for the death and the blood just for what? Some money? And Quark says he was just doing his job. We'll probably talk about stuff like that later. At the pit of, the main starship thing, baby K is sleeping and not crying, but Ben says, Miles, take you some time off. This is no place for a baby. Figure it out. Jadzia shows up to her quarters. Quark is there to give a tango board, and Quark intimates that he has a plan, but Jadzia is quite done with him. Quark finally realizes in this last moment that he's willing to die for 28 million. He has an almost utilitarian moment. So he has a plan. Quark tells Haggett he doesn't have the wares that they need and has an idea for a new weapon that will kill less people. And then he is told that all of his debts are paid. This will be his first payday, but Quark's harebrained scheme will hopefully work. And then Quark goes to General Nassik, who's beefing with the Regent, and they're on the station, so he's doing a deal, enemy of my enemy, basically setting up some mutually assured destruction. But all they have to do is not see each other, the Regent and the General. But as a double play, he dupes his cousin to get them to war in the station, where they start shooting and blasting, and they get arrested. Them being arrested means they can't do all the bad, killing of millions of people. Worf visits Miles and asks about duty. Miles says he needs to be a good dad and gives Worf his baby to hold. Worf laments that he never held his son at that age. If you are a fan of Star Trek The Next Generation, you meet Worf's son at certain points, but they have an interesting relationship. And Miles falls asleep. In Ben's office, Ben reprimands Quark. He's got some stuff going on. Serious charges. Major fallout. Bad stuff. But Quark is nonplussed. He didn't want the shooting, but he just wanted the deal to go bad. Ben says the region is dead, and Gyla and Hagath are on the run, and there's some crews in pursuit. And Quark just basically says that he's willing to take the heat. He saved 28 million lives. A couple people died, but it's worth it to him, over 28 million. Things will change. There will be consequences because Quark will have to pay for the bill of all the damages. And Quark says he'll pay in installments if they forget the charges. And then we see Quark and Jadzia are friends again, and they play tango. And Jadzia is not giving her set back, the setback, you know what I mean. And there we have one of the great Quark episodes.
A note to our listeners. If you love the Southpaw Project, please support us and help us get paid for our labor by financially supporting us on Patreon. This will give you access to exclusive bonus content, like transcripts, early releases of Southpaw Deep Space Nine, our fictional narrative podcast, Fighters Brew, break-free versions of our shows without interruptions like you're hearing now, bonus articles, Fighters Brew transcripts with extra content, Liberation Martial Arts Online, as well as our private chat group on Discord. You can find all pertinent links at southpawpod.com. This episode is another one that hits very hard today.
Absolutely.
It's not really about arms sales. It's about genocide. And it's about the cavalier way Western bureaucrats and agents talk about genocide and massacres. And it's also about the litmus test that so many people today are talking about. As Scott, you've pointed out in the past, fascism is often procedural. It's just numbers, orders, policies, and reports. If you read any of the historical books about covert Western actions across the world and transcripts of how Western imperialists talk about it, it's very much like Hagath and Gala, as if it's no big deal. Israel for years called genociding Palestinians as, quote unquote, mowing the lawn. You'll find similar remarks by the US and Great Britain. It's all, as the title says, business as usual. To us, it's a genocide. To them, it's another Tuesday. So Quark becomes the moral compass, which is unexpected and makes it more complex and interesting. And I take it less as character growth. Instead, you realize Quark deep down isn't all that different from Rom. They really are brothers. Quark isn't a good person, like Scott mentioned, but he does draw lines. He won't cross. He has his own moral code. And this is a theme we previously explored with the Jem'Hadar. They are engineered to be merciless killers, but somehow still evolved an honor code. Quark too has his own unique code. We've actually seen several times in the show how Ferengi codes for capitalism isn't even the most optimized for making money. There's other beings, other people who are better at it. We saw that in this episode as well, with real capitalists investing and planning ahead, and the Ferengi looking more at the here and now, which is kind of the opposite of the concept of compounding interest. So the Ferengi have their own cultural code that sometimes works against their own want of money. That is even more evident with Quark. He's his own person.
there's this idea of, oh, I'm just doing my job. And this is a common thing when we look back at things. If you look back at, if you saw the Zone of Interest, it's a rough movie. I don't even know that it's that great, but it is poignant. It is obviously about content warning. Someone who's in control of what is going on in Auschwitz in the Second World War, and he really just treats it like a job. And the person that for which the movie is based on, when he was caught, he never really changed the tune. He was like, I was just doing my job. And there's a way to slowly make people think that, what they're doing isn't so wrong, or what they're doing is just part of what they're being told, and it's just business as usual. And there's a really strange Nicolas Cage movie where he's like a gun runner, and it's like loosely based on these people that sell guns to everybody, that sell weapons to everybody. And there's like, we're just doing our job. And then you ask yourself what you would do in fascist times. But right now, there are little pockets of silent ills happening. And I'm almost afraid to talk about them, because of what is happening for people. But if you're asking, like, what were regular people doing during the dark times, and if you're doing nothing, this is what happens. Because also, there are truly people that so think that what is going on in the Middle East is a war effort. There's so people on the side of Israel, and they really are truly brainwashed to think of this sort of thing, and it's just happening. Or in Sudan, or in other places, and or in Georgia, where people are saying, "Oh, America's not like The Handmaid's Tale," when a story bit from The Handmaid's Tale, which I have a lot of problems with that show, but that's a whole nother story. We're not a Handmaid's Tale show. We're a political Star Trek show.
Yes.
But things are happening, so it's strange, and I do think it's important to talk about.
So this episode was simple in its premise, but the premise had stakes. It's not like a Marvel movie where you could just redo everything, right? And we've had stakes before, but this time we had Quark at the center. And I couldn't help but make a comparison, because normally when we see these sorts of stakes, it's one of the crew members at the center. So that's a lot easier. But this time we had Quark. But then, because of something you and I talked about in previous episodes, about how when you have a show with such depth, as far as like how many episodes it's had, how many seasons it's had, how many episodes per season, and also it was a longer time slot. It wasn't just a 30-minute show, right? And so they had a lot of time to work with. And then through these episodes, you can make comparisons with past episodes. And so these episodes can read different, because you could even analyze it and compare it to other episodes and have different readings of it. And so I compare how Cisco and Dax were in a high stakes moral situation for the uniform, to how Quark acted in this one. And in comparison, Quark acted more morally than they did, while they, as neoliberal political actors, acted all morally superior in this episode. The whole thing draws parallels in a lot of unintentional ways. I found, as a radical, watching with today's eyes, a lot of the best political satires that come out of DS9 happen unintentionally.
Oh, yeah.
Scott, you mentioned this before, but the unintended subtext is what draws so many people to Star Trek. And they can have so many different readings of it because they are exploring just different storylines, different situations. And I guess that's not just something that comes out of Star Trek. I think that is what people love about sci-fi, that ability to explore the unexplored or have situations you don't normally have. And then you can have different readings of that.
Yeah, and only really annoying creators say, "Oh, well, it's wrong. There's only one way." Most creators are like, "Whoa, I didn't think about that, but that's awesome." Or like, I really love that people have taken on this stuff. And also, Ira Bear, I think his name is one of the showrunners. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he said that if he wished he could have done more. He really felt that even though the show was ahead of its time with some of its stuff, he wishes that he had made Garak canonically gay, which he says like that's what he would do if he were to continue the show, and that eventually we will have to deal with the trans episode. And again, they could have done more, and they still did a lot in their time frame, and definitely did some accidental cool stuff.
They did intentional cool stuff, accidental cool stuff. That's the thing about when you go to bat so many times, when you make that many episodes, a lot of stuff happens.
Yeah, I do miss like 28 episode seasons. 18 would be okay, or even 16.
Yeah, people don't even know how long they used to go because sometimes, right, if a show was popular or a network just needed something to fill in the summer, they would extend the show to be even longer to run through the summer because they just needed extra programming. And something you mentioned at the end, right? There was also a subplot or a B plot about parents' fatherhood again, which I actually am enjoying this kind of running theme about parenthood, which I guess is unavoidable because of O'Brien's kid. But there's a bunch of stories that have nothing to do with O'Brien's kids too. So, like even the parentage of some of the crew members. So in this one, there was some exploration of that. And going back to the comparison of how Quark acted in this episode and how Dax and Cisco acted in this episode and how they acted in for the uniform and how morally superior Dax is acting in this episode, even though I know how she acted in for the uniform, right? I'm also thinking about Cisco in that B plot because Cisco is known and remembered, right? Like because people have like this edited memory, he's known as this like and remembered as this loving father. But more and more, I question how warranted that is because he's only like that with his son. But in this episode, again, to other kids, he's not like that. He's cold, he's procedural, which actually I think maybe intentionally even he's business as usual, right? Very cold, very business as usual. He's not going to be tender just because there's a kid on the bridge, right?
Nope.
So that was another comparison that came out for me. And I think, you've talked about this when people are watching again, like actually watching it, right? Not skipping episodes. It's like, man, it's not the same DS9 you think you remembered. Memory's a funny thing, right? We rewrite our memories and reinvent them often. They're not a video recorder that records things exactly as they happen.
Yeah, but I still love it.
Now there's like even more interesting things to love, like more complex things than before, right? Because of like some of these unintentional things, some of these comparisons with past episodes, and also parallels to today, because people who watched it the first time around and people who watch it now, we have a different kind of read of it because it hits so hard. I don't think it was hitting that hard for people back then. It was hitting maybe in a personal way or in an enjoyment way, but today it hits much more political. I could see people watching this back in the day and be like, making an argument that this show isn't political. But today, with everything going on, it would be so hard to make that argument, right? So I think there's a lot of different ways you could read it and enjoyable in different ways. Scott, you know where I'm headed?
4 stars. I thought it was so good. I really enjoyed them starting to even more introduce gray topics and seeing the limits of Quark. Because when the Ferengi were introduced in Star Trek The Next Generation, they were more feral.
That's the ones I remember.
Yeah, and I really don't like it. I have trouble, with people sometimes saying like, oh well, there's like, they're Jews and stuff, and they're not.
You think that's because how the Next Generation painted them so flat is part of the problem?
Yeah, and I also think sometimes sci-fi is lazy and does like stuff that I don't agree with.
Aliens of the Week.
Yeah, but they made the Ferengi not the aliens of the week. The people that worked on Deep Space Nine, they all had like their races, which is weird. I almost feel weird saying that word, that they had a soft spot for. And that's why you really have, and I said this before, you really have the development of the Klingons in a way that doesn't really get done more until Discovery. But that's again, it's very different. And you have like the Bajorans and the Ferengi, and you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Nobody's flat, nobody's one-dimensional. Unless you're an extra.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the next episode?
Complicated Kira daddy issues.
Until then.